Right, we now come to the urgent question. Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero if he will make a statement on the ruling of the Rosebank and Jackdaw oil fields as unlawful.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government's priority is to deliver a fair, orderly and prosperous transition in the North Sea, which recognises the role that oil and gas will play in the coming decades. This transition will be in line with our climate and legal obligations. It will drive towards our clean energy future of energy security, lower bills and good long-term jobs. On the 29th of January, the Court of Session published its judgment in relation to the Rosebank and Jackdaw oil and gas fields in the North Sea. This judgment set out that previous consents granted to Rosebank and Jackdaw were unlawful, as they failed to take into account the emissions from burning the fuel produced. As a result, if developers wish to proceed with these projects, they will need to reapply for consent, this time considering Scope 3 emissions, as required by the Supreme Court judgment last year. Whilst the judgment itself is a matter for the courts, the Government has taken rapid action. In early January, we consulted on revised environmental guidance to take into account emissions from burning extracted oil and gas to provide stability for industry. This consultation closed on the 8th of July and we're working towards publication of finalised guidance as soon as possible. Once this guidance is in place, the Government will resume making decisions with regard to the environmental impact assessments for offshore oil and gas developments. The Court confirmed that it is in the interests of good administration for this consultation and guidance to be completed properly. It would therefore be inappropriate for me to comment on the specifics of individual projects like Rosebank and Jackdaw in Parliament or anywhere else, because doing so would prejudice future regulatory decision-making should the respective developers decide to resubmit these projects for approval. More widely, this Government is determined to deliver the long-term jobs and investment and the clean energy future this country needs to ensure that people in the North Sea and involved in the oil and gas industry across this country have the long-term future they need.
Just for my clarification, you don't make the jurisdiction on the planning issue and it's no longer in the court. So I'm a little bit confused by a decision that you will be involved going forward. Minister.
Well, I'm happy to clarify based on the advice that I have, which is that, of course, this matter for the applicants in the court case are entitled to appeal the judgment should they wish to do so. If they wish to make a further application in this matter, my department will be responsible for making that judgment, and I seek not to prejudice that application by giving an opinion one way or the other on these matters. And I hope that that sits with you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, kind of, but obviously members will want to ask you today, so I don't want to try and close it down too early. Right, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In August, this Government withdrew lawyers from the case defending the legal challenge to the issuing of licences for Rosebank and Jackdaw in the North Sea. Given this Government's decision to revoke any defence, the Court's quashing of approval was all but inevitable. It is deeply disappointing and yet unsurprising that this Government, driven by the zealotry that it is happy to put billions of pounds of investment and thousands of jobs at risk just because it doesn't align with Just Stop Oil's vision of the future. It demonstrates that this Government is not willing to stand up for businesses or workers. The party opposite seem to misunderstand this simple point. If we shut down our oil and gas industry, we will not use any less oil and gas. Even the Climate Change Committee knows this, but the department seems to ignore the fact that we will be simply relying on more imports instead. If those imports are LNG, they will come with 4 times the production emissions, and if we're importing from Norway, we are shipping in gas from underneath the very same North Sea. So sacrificing our domestic industry only to rely on foreign imports and compound global carbon emissions is utter madness for our economy and for the climate. It makes a mockery of our prospects for growth. And it will cost the Treasury £12 billion in lost revenue. And to put that into perspective, Mr. Speaker, that's 8.5 years' worth of winter fuel payments. And last week, the developers of Rosebank, Equinor, announced that they are slashing their offshore wind investment. So does the Minister appreciate that the self-harm inflicted on the North Sea is damaging investment in other offshore renewables industries too? And this could be wrecking our path forward. The Government is utterly confused. A Chancellor and a Secretary of State completely out of touch with the public, obviously, but apparently also with each other. It's no surprise that the Secretary of State is prepared to sacrifice growth, investment and energy security for his ideological obsession. So can I ask the Minister for clarity? And this is a very important point. Will the department treat the new applications, if they are resubmitted, as existing applications or new applications, given that they have a ban on all new licences moving forward? Will the government back growth and back British workers when the decision reaches his department? And who does he think will win this argument outright, the Secretary of State or the Chancellor of the Exchequer?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Shadow Minister for his response, although I'm not sure it's entirely constructive in the conversation that we're having here. He knows as well as anyone that this is a live process and that the companies involved in these two projects have the right to apply in the future. And it would be wrong for me to, in the House of Commons or anywhere else, prejudice those applications. I'll come to his question in a moment. Prejudice those applications by stating an opinion. But of course, what he failed to mention in his questions was how we got to this place we are at the moment. The Court of Session clearly outlined in their judgment that the previous Secretary of State made a decision which was unlawful. And so once again, this Labour government is having to clear up a mess created by the previous Conservative government. And unlike them, we are going to follow due process. And so we will follow the process that I outlined in my first answer, which is to clearly say we consulted on what the future of the consenting process will look like in light of the Supreme Court's judgment, something that he would have had to have done if he was still in this job, because we had to respond to the Supreme Court's judgment. And if he's telling us now that, in fact, he and government would have ignored the judgment of the Supreme Court, then that is a particularly interesting perspective to take. On his specific point, we were very clear during the election that our position is no new licences to explore new fields. These two projects, of course, are already in existing licensed fields. The question for the courts to decide was the consent for these individual new projects, and that is the process that we will now take forward if these companies should wish to resubmit their applications. The question in the broader sense about the future of the North Sea isn't going to be about one or two individual projects, but the reality that the North Sea is a declining basin and that the long-term future does not rest in oil and gas, as important as oil and gas will continue to be for many, many years to come. And what we've sought to do as a government is kick-start what the economic future will look like beyond oil and gas, recognising it's a declining basin, recognising the importance of new technologies like carbon capture, hydrogen, and investing in things like the Clean Industry Bonus that will deliver jobs in Aberdeen. There's only one party that's serious about working out what the transition looks like and what comes next to safeguard jobs in his constituency and across the North East, and it's not the party opposite.
Chair of the Select Committee, Bill Esterson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend for confirming the government's commitment to supporting the production of existing North Sea oil and gas fields, and for confirming the desire to partner closely with industry and with workers on the transition away from fossil fuels. But does he agree with me that the workers and the communities that rely on the North Sea would be in a much stronger position if we'd not witnessed over the last decade a chaotic mismanagement of the decline in the basin that he just referred to, and indeed the failure to plan for a loss of 70,000 jobs in that decade alone?
Well, I think the Chair of the Select Committee makes a really important point, which is to recognise that the idea that a transition has not already been underway is to bury your head in the sand and pretend that everything will just carry on as it was. The reality is that in the past decade, a third of the oil and gas workforce is, as my honourable friend said, 70,000 workers have already lost their job. This transition is underway. We are determined to make sure that that transition leads to a future in the North Sea energy sector that's, yes, oil and gas for many, many years to come, but that we build now the industries of the future so that there isn't a gap. The alternative is to do what the previous party did, which is pretend the transition's not underway and then somehow deal with the shock that comes when inevitably oil and gas in the North Sea declines to a point where workers are not protected in those jobs. We're determined to build what comes next and to protect good, well-paid jobs in the North Sea for many decades to come.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Pippa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The decisions we make in the next decade on energy will make or break the planet, and this is key also for the Jackdaw and Rosebank oil fields. Should the proposed developers apply for a new development consent, this ruling now gives the government the opportunity to take a rational and science-based approach, to make a decision on the future of the field based upon what is best for the planet, the people of Britain and the UK's international leadership. Approving these oil fields, contrary to what has been said by the Honourable Member, will not protect UK workers. Despite promises of jobs, not a single UK design or construction role has been created. Instead, this work is being outsourced to Dubai. Business leaders agree a fair transition away from oil and gas will boost our economy, create jobs and attract investment. The Liberal Democrats oppose the oil fields at Jackdaw and Rosebank. Instead of pouring money into an energy source that is not consistent with our climate commitments, then we should be calling on the government to invest in renewables, an ambitious green energy strategy and one that lowers costs, creates jobs and secures our future. What assessments will the Minister make on our climate commitments?
Well, for the reason that I've outlined in previous answers, I'm not going to give a specific commentary on these two projects, but I will take the broader point that the Honourable Lady makes, which is that we have to have, in any applications in the future of the North Sea, a recognition of what the Supreme Court ruled, which is that the end-use emissions, the Scope 3 emissions, must be taken into account in any application. And so what we consulted on at the start of this year and what we received a significant number of responses to, which we're now working through, is how do people wishing to apply for consents for extracting hydrocarbons from the continental shelf comply with the Supreme Court's judgment of taking into account those Scope 3 emissions. And so an environmental assessment of that will be absolutely necessary. That's not a decision that we've made from a political point of view. It's one that was required by the Supreme Court. We're going to follow the law of this land, as I would have expected any government to make, but apparently not the party opposite, and we'll put in place a robust system to make sure that applications are judged fairly on their merits when they come before us.
Torcuil Crichton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his statement, constrained as it is by the legal situation. And can I also say what a cheek the member for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine has coming to the House pretending to be a hero and protector of the oil industry when 70,000 jobs, as the member for Sefton Central pointed out, have been lost on his government's watch.
Absolutely.
But on the point at issue and on this necessary transition from carbon to renewables, there must be a balance. It's not an either-or. We've been in the North Sea for 2 generations, and we'll be there for 2 generations more as we wind down the basin. Politics is often about symbols, and the renewed consents for Rosebank and Jackdaw, if they come, offer an opportunity to reassure workers in this industry that when we plan for a fair and just transition from the old to the new, that they will not be left behind.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for the question, and I think the tone of it is incredibly important for us to remember, which is that there are many thousands of extremely talented, skilled, experienced workers in this industry who I have had a great privilege of meeting over the past 7 months in this role. And what we have to do is make sure that we build an industry that is resilient to what the future looks like. Now, some of that will be for many decades to come. Oil and gas that's already licensed and consented, and any other projects that come through that go through the process. But it will also be about building the industry that comes next. And it would be irresponsible of any government to focus on one at the exclusion of the other. The reality is that the North Sea is a super mature basin. A transition is already underway, and it is incumbent on us and on any responsible government to build the industry that comes next and to continue to support the oil and gas industry that we have today.
Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that there is a double standard in the government backing expansion at Heathrow to drive economic growth, but not providing maximum possible support to our domestic oil and gas industry?
Well, I think the Chancellor was very clear in her speech that there isn't an argument between our net zero commitments and between the industrialisation that we want to see. Economic growth projects like the runway at Heathrow will be important, but they will have to be in line with our climate obligations, and the Chancellor said that in her speech. And look, I think the important thing here is that this isn't an either-or. I think actually, as my honourable friend said, oil and gas will continue to play an important role in our economy for many, many years to come, but we do have to plan for what comes next and take cognizance of our legal and climate obligations.
Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would urge the Minister and colleagues on this side of the House to take no lessons in fair and just transition away from fossil fuels from the party opposite, because our coalfield communities were destroyed in this country over Tory governments over decades. And what we need to do, in contrast, is look at the growth we are providing now by lifting the onshore wind ban, investing in CCS and establishing GB Energy.
I'll find a question, Mr. Speaker. Of course, I think my honourable friend's point is right, that we have seen transitions in key industries in our history that have left workers high and dry. Instead of recognising a transition is underway and supporting that workforce into what comes next. The coal industry devastated large parts of my constituency in Lanarkshire and across England and Wales, and continues to have consequences for generations now. We're determined that doesn't happen in the North Sea, but that requires us to plan the transition and to put the transition into place now, not to bury our heads in the sand and pretend everything is fine.
Dave Doogan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What does the Minister think workers in Scotland are thinking right now as they watch the UK Government and indeed a Scottish Minister going out of their way to accelerate the decline in North Sea oil and gas jobs way in advance of those replacement jobs coming on stream, when they look at what's happening at Grangemouth? Does he not understand that the reduction in attrition to North Sea oil and gas production has to be commensurate with a reduction in demand and an increase in renewables jobs? And he's got that mix all over the place.
Well, I'm not sure if the honourable gentleman is one of the SNP cohort that are seeking to move to our other parliament, but of course the position of the SNP in Holyrood is the same as our position, which is that any new licences have to be cognisant of climate change obligations. Now, perhaps he has a different position to his colleagues in Holyrood, I'm not sure, but the SNP recognise, quite rightly, as we do, that the future, yes, requires investment in oil and gas for many years to come, and we're committed to that, but that it also must match in with our climate obligations. And the transition that's underway now must have government at the heart of it, supporting the jobs and industries that come in the future. If the honourable gentleman supported some of the investment that we've proposed, like Great British Energy in Aberdeen, instead of deriding it at every single turn, and Mr. Speaker, I've united again all the members of Parliament from the north east of Scotland who oppose investment in their own constituencies. If he supported it, maybe he would see the jobs of the future coming.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the previous government, thousands upon thousands of jobs were lost in the North Sea. Energy bills hit record highs, and they put Britain's energy security in the hands of Vladimir Putin. Now, having made a patently unlawful decision on Rosebank, they are here to lecture us on energy policy. It is the truth that our clean energy mission will deliver the jobs and economic growth of the future, our commitment to climate action and lower bills. The party opposite are stuck in the past. Can I ask the Minister to remain focused on the future and deliver our clean energy mission, which will deliver the economic and environmental benefits that the public want to see?
Well, my honourable friend makes the point that, of course, the long-term future of our energy security in this country is not in oil and gas, as important as it will continue to play for many, many years to come. The clean power mission that we are driving forward at pace to deliver is about building the homegrown renewable power that will deliver energy security in the long term. But for many years to come, oil and gas will continue to play an important part, not just in our energy mix, but in our wider economic system here in this country, and we will support the jobs in the industry in the north east of Scotland to make sure that that transition is fair and prosperous for all.
Sir Julian.
Am I right in thinking that if the government in a future application does take these factors of emissions into account, it will not be for the court then to say that having taken them into account, the government has arrived at the wrong decision in wanting to proceed? It's surely for the government to decide whether to proceed or not the courts.
Yes. Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question, and we're still digesting the detail of the judgment, but my understanding, as he puts it, is that the Supreme Court made it very clear that applications should take account of those Scope 3 emissions, and will have to justify, in the process that we put in place, which I'm not going to preempt at the moment, will have to justify how they have met that requirement. It will then be for the NSTA to make a judgment and the Secretary of State ultimately to make that decision. And of course that judgment will then be subject to, if somebody wanted to take it to a judicial review, they could be entitled to do so. But the decision, as he puts it, is quite right, that it will be a decision for the government.
Still a Priest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for the thoughtful way he's proceeding, because we all recognise that climate change is actually a threat to growth rather than a driver of it, whether it is the flooding, the fires, the chaos that it causes. So it is right and shocking, frankly, that the previous government didn't take account of the emissions and the impact that might have on our economy in making the decision to proceed with Rosebank, and it's right that we rethink. I recognise what the Minister says about court judgments. Can I press him, though? His predecessors had to then admit there was no energy security in proceeding with Rosebank, because 80% of the oil and gas that it would provide would not be for the UK market. This would not drive down British consumers' bills. Is that still his understanding about this project, and another good reason why we should just rethink it?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, that I think she's right to make the point that climate change isn't a future threat but a present reality. And this year alone, we can see a number of examples around the world of where that present reality is already having huge and devastating impacts on people's lives. I think the balance that we want to strike is that, yes, the oil and gas industry is important to our economy and to our energy mix, but that the long-term future does require us to move towards the clean power of the future. And I would just make the point that even if gas is extracted from the North Sea, it doesn't help with consumer bills in this country, because it's traded on an open market to the highest bidder and sold by private companies. This isn't a nationalised industry. It's owned by private companies, it's extracted by private companies, it's sold by private companies, and consumers in this country don't benefit whether that gas comes from abroad or from the North Sea.
Connor Den.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Minister will not comment on Rosebank or Jackdaw because of the threat of legal appeals, will he at least confirm that his government will put a stop to extraction from a reported 30 new oil and gas fields which received their licence from the previous government but are still awaiting their final consent, and which I believe are not subject to the restrictions that cause him not to want to comment on Rosebank and Jackdaw?
Well, just to be very clear, Mr. Speaker, I'm not suggesting that I can't comment because of particular legal action, but my department will have a responsibility for making the decisions, and it would be wrong for me to prejudice that process by saying in Parliament or anywhere else what my view is on those applications. That's entirely how these applications end up back in court, and that's what I'm determined to avoid. What I would say is that the question about licensing was very clearly outlined by us in the election, which is that we will not issue new licences to explore new fields. Existing licences will be honoured, and we will not remove licences from those that already have a licence. But the question of consents, which is of course the point at which extraction takes place, must take into account climate tests, not least the compatibility test laid down by the Supreme Court, and any applications now or in the future must take account of that.
Toby Perkins.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The 6th carbon budgets were put in place by the previous government. They were pretty ambitious, and it's now for this government to identify how they're going to be achieved. It seems that the Minister's taken an entirely practical approach to this, and I commend him for it. But can he assure us that in achieving those legally bound carbon budgets that have been put in place, the approach that this government will take is to ensure that any new applications that do come in will only be approved if they are within their own, on their own basis, able to achieve any offsets or mitigations to ensure that that new application keeps us in line with those carbon budgets that we're legally obliged to achieve?
Well, my honourable friend touches on some of the really key questions that we asked in the consultation, which closed just a few weeks ago, and which we had a significant number of responses to. The question of how we put into effect the Supreme Court's judgment which requires us to look at some of the tests that he mentions, particularly if there are offsets or mitigations, is what we will announce in due course in terms of the guidance that comes from that consultation. We have only just closed the consultation and are working as fast as possible on the results from that. But applicants for consents will absolutely have to take account of the Scope 3 emissions, and it will be for them to outline in their application how they intend to mitigate against any impact in order to achieve any consent that they apply for.
Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rosebank, we've already seen that if it does not go ahead, we'll have 6.6 billion of lost investment and 2,000 jobs lost. These are 2,000 jobs in the North East, which are really, really important to us. They're there for sentiment, they're there for confidence, and they're also to show that we actually have a future. At the moment, it feels like the North East is being sailed down the river, and that any opportunity that we have going forward is being lost because this government is so ideologically committed to ensuring that we move away from oil and gas as quickly as possible, not to do with when it's right, it's because they want to do it now. Absolutely. Is this government really still committed to jobs and security in North East of Scotland? Because it really doesn't feel like that living up there.
Well, I would gently say to the Honourable Lady that this has nothing whatsoever to do with ideology when it is about the government. Well, when it is about the government responding to a legal judgment of a court. Not just the Court of Session in this particular case, but the Supreme Court, which was a decision taken by the previous government to unlawfully grant consent. We now have to respond to that judgment from the Supreme Court and make sure that any future application process is robust and that it doesn't end up in the courts again. That's what we're determined to do. It will be for individual applicants to bring forward their applications. But on the wider point on jobs, I'm acutely aware of the importance of making sure there is certainty in the North East. I've spent a lot of time in this job making an effort to get to know not just the individual companies but the supply chains, the support companies, those on apprenticeships that work in the North East. It is important to me, as it is important to her. I say to her and to her whole party that we cannot move forward simply saying that oil and gas is the only future for the North East of Scotland. It is a finite resource, and now we are very clearly saying that the balance requires us to start investing now in the transition of the future so that there are good, well-paid jobs to come for many generations.
Very good.
I welcome what my honourable friend has said about the importance of the just transition and the need to move gradually through to renewables. And he quoted from our party's manifesto saying that we will not issue new licence to new fields. But can I remind him that there was another part to that paragraph? And it was because, there was a reason for it, because they will not take a penny off bills, cannot make us energy secure, and will only accelerate the worsening climate crisis. Can he confirm that the 3 million barrels of oil that would come out of Rosebank would in fact not take a penny off bills, cannot make us energy secure, and would only worsen the climate crisis?
Well, I think what we have outlined in the 7 months we've been in government is our determination to deliver the energy security that this country lacked in the last 14 years. The lack of preparedness for the previous government for not just our energy security into the future, but the bills that all of our constituents paid higher than ever before and led to the cost of living crisis that we are in today. That was because the party opposite were happy to have us at the casino of fossil fuel prices. We are determined that that is not our future and that we're no longer in throw to petrostates and dictators who can, even though very, very little of our gas comes from those countries, we remain vulnerable to the prices that are set by international markets. We are determined that that doesn't happen, and we're building the clean power system that will take us away from it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister talks of the threats of the climate crisis and the need for us to meet our climate commitments, which is, of course, encouraging to hear. So could the Minister tell the House that in an effort to help us reduce our reliance on oil and gas, what steps the Government is actually taking right now to improve the energy efficiency of homes across the UK to help us reduce our dependence on oil and gas?
Well, I pay credit, first of all, to the Honourable Lady for the ingenious way that she's got a very important question into this question, because she does make a good point that, as well as making sure that we've built the clean power system for the needs of the future, we also want to try and reduce as much as possible, first of all, the need for households to heat their homes by making homes much warmer in the first place, by improving the standard of homes, by the work that my colleague, the Minister for Consumers, is doing around the Warm Homes Plan. We know that some of the poorest people in our country live in substandard homes that are cold and that take far too much of their monthly budgets to heat, and we're determined to do something about that. And also across the wider piece around how we can have energy efficiency measures that reduce the demand that we need in the years ahead.
Blake.
Speaker, the remaining global carbon budget is extremely small, amounting to just 5 years of present global emissions. There is significant evidence that burning all oil and gas in existing fields globally would exceed the 1.5-degree limit. The climate pollution from burning Rosebank's reserves would be more than the combined annual CO2 emissions of all 28 lowest-income countries in the world. Does the Minister agree we should focus on a fair transition for our communities and workers as we transition to other forms of energy, rather than giving CPR to an already declining industry?
Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend again outlines the importance of us tackling the climate crisis that is with us now, and that's why this government has been determined through our Clean Power Action Plan to move faster, but also the wider work that the department's doing around decarbonising across our economy. It's incredibly important, and we don't have a moment to waste. I think the point around the fair transition is key, and this is around making sure that, yes, we move away from a carbon-based economy. We've already closed the last of our coal power stations in this country. That was an important moment, but it was also, for me, visiting Ratcliffe-on-Soar, an important moment to recognise where a transition can be done well. And actually, I hear the Shadow Minister chuntering under a Conservative government. It was an example of where the previous Conservative government did recognise the coal industry was declining and that a transition was necessary. He seems to fail to recognise the same for the oil and gas industry, which is declining. And if we don't start now planning for that future, we'll leave those workers with nothing.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government professes to want growth and jobs, and yet is giving no incentive or indication whatsoever to the developers of Rosebank and Jackdaw as to whether or not, if they spend millions of pounds on a new application, whether the government will or will not grant consent. So those developers are much more likely to say, I'm not going to bother, I'm going to invest my money elsewhere. Will the Minister give an indication, yes or no, to a compliant application?
Well, I think the honourable gentleman seeks to take me far beyond what I said at the beginning, which is not just to give an opinion on it, but he seems to say actually just adjudicate on the application right here in the House of Commons before either of the companies have applied. I think he knows fine well that I'm not going to do that. What we have put in place is a robust process where the clear pathway from the Supreme Court's judgment will set out exactly what companies have to do in their future applications. I think it's highly likely that in this case both those involved in these projects will seek to apply again. They will do so, and the government will make a decision in due course. But I would say to him on the wider point about investment that this government is doing everything to make this one of the most investable places in the world to come and do business, clearing away, investing in this country because it's important. And the Clean Power Action Plan that we announced that the honourable gentleman opposes will deliver up to £40 billion of investment in this country every single year in the industrial future of this country, and he should get behind it.
Thank the Minister for his statement, and I appreciate his approach and not wanting to prejudice the judicial review or the judicial process. And I do wonder whether if the members opposite had a similar responsible approach to government, we wouldn't be discussing this today. But in very general terms, does the Minister agree with me that it's vital for this government to honour not just the letter but also the spirit of our manifesto, and also would he agree with me that it was originally firstly approved over 20 years ago?
Well, I think it is important just to separate out the question of the licences in these two cases and the consent process. Licences and consenting have always been different processes. What we have said is that we will absolutely respect licences that have been issued. We have no plans, we will not revoke existing licences. but we won't issue new licences to explore new fields. Now, as my honourable friend rightly says, in these cases, licences have been for these fields for a very, very long time. We will not revoke the licences for those, but the question now is around specific consent applications for these specific projects, and that will come before the Department when we've put in place the process to respond to the Supreme Court's judgment, and when the companies, if interested, resubmit their applications.
Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, Rosebank and Jackdaw oil and gas fields could supply 8% of the UK's gas needs. The Minister has talked a lot about the court cases, but can he please clarify why did the Prime Minister let the Energy Secretary take government lawyers off defending this case? And if this push for growth means anything, will they be looking again at the processes around judicial review and changing them?
Well, on the 20th of June last year, the Supreme Court ruled that regulators must consider the impact of burning extracted oil and gas in the environmental impact assessment for new projects. Now, of course, we were already in an election cycle by that point. I don't know what the previous government would have done, but I would find it incredibly difficult to believe that, faced with a Supreme Court judgment that gave very clear steers that regulators must consider the impact of burning extracted oil and gas in the assessment for new projects, I would find it very hard to believe that they would justify continuing to defend a case that the Supreme Court had very clearly stated it wasn't able to be continued. This government took the view that instead of putting more public money into a case where actually the two applicants themselves had accepted the judgment of the Supreme Court, it would be wrong for the government to continue to put money into it. If the opposition is now saying that they would have continued to pour public money into a case where the Supreme Court had ruled, I'd be very surprised, but perhaps not disappointed, or perhaps disappointed but not surprised.
Una Kamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the party opposite are speaking up now, but I was present at the United Nations General Assembly when they risked investor confidence in the UK, when the then Prime Minister rode back on the net zero commitments, risking investor confidence in the UK and risking our reputation globally on our climate leadership. This government is putting us back on a world stage on climate leadership, and we have a goal to deliver clean power by 2030. Does the Minister agree with me that the UK's key growth sectors of the future, including jobs for the future, are in renewable energy and our own GB energy?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for the question, and I think the point on investor confidence is important. Investors lost all confidence in this country under the previous government. Not quite knowing who was going to be in number 10 or number 11 at any given moment certainly didn't help with investor confidence. We're building back that investor confidence, and have already had tens of billions of investment since we came to power and 70,000 new jobs. And on climate leadership, it matters that this country takes a role in climate leadership, because the truth is that the transition that we are seeing, that we want to deliver here, is also one that's being delivered right across the world. The country with the fastest transition last year to clean power was in fact China. And the idea that we are now, in some cases in this Parliament, seeking to roll back from our net zero commitments, we are determined to double down on them, because it's the best way to deliver stability, energy security, bring down bills and create the industrial future and jobs that this country needs.
Samuel Wilson.
There's hardly a day goes past in this place where the ministers aren't telling us how broke the country is. And yet here we have a minister who can't give a commitment to the extraction of the liquid gold which lies under this country and which could generate jobs, generate tax revenue, give us energy security and reduce the import bill. Is it not a fact that this court judgment has driven a hole in the growth strategy, because due to the targets that we have set, legal targets for CO2 reduction, every major infrastructure project in this country will be legally challengeable and can be turned down on the basis that it generates CO2?
Yeah. Minister.
Well, I'd say to the honourable gentleman that the reason we are here is because the court ruled that the previous government made an unlawful decision by not taking into account the judgment of the Supreme Court. So that's not me saying that from a policy perspective, it's the court saying that, and we are now moving as quickly as possible to put in place a process that gives confidence to industry and that allows applications to come forward, because we've said oil and gas will continue to play an important role for many years to come. We won't revoke existing licences, and therefore it is open for applications to come forward for particular projects, and they'll be considered on their individual merits. But he and I will always disagree on the fundamental point that actually tackling the climate is in all of our interests. We see right around the world the impact of not tackling the climate. It is a clear and present danger to our country now and to our national security, and we will tackle it.
Go point.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another day, another Labour minister cleaning up the mess of the Conservatives before them. The only reason we are having this discussion today, and there's any lack of clarity for workers in the North East, is because the Conservatives are messing up in government. But does he agree with me that supporting projects like Rosebank and Jackdaw are entirely compatible with our drive towards a net zero economy, as we'll continue to need domestic oil and gas to 2050 and likely beyond, and therefore we should be maximising UK production, where we can do so with the highest possible labour standards, the highest possible environmental standards, and secure and create jobs in Scotland and the UK?
Minister.
I repeat again the point that he is right. We are putting in place a robust and clear process so that applications can come forward that are able to apply in a way that is in line with what the Supreme Court ruled, so that these applications can be decided on their merits, and that's important. On the question of UK production, I've said a number of times, and I will keep on saying, that oil and gas in the UK will play an incredibly important role for many, many years to come. That investment is important. The jobs are important. The skills in the North East are important. And of course, he raises the point about environmental standards. I've been really pleased to hear in the past few months I've been in this job about the huge work that has been undertaken by oil and gas companies to decarbonise the work that they're doing in terms of electrification and other work to do it. But this question is about the Scope 3 emissions, which the Supreme Court ruled must be taken into account, which is the end use of the hydrocarbons as well, and we'll put in place a process to deal with that.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, of course, in excess of 400 redundancy letters were issued to workers at Grangemouth, Scotland's only oil refinery, so perhaps the Minister will start matching his warm words with some action in relation to a just transition. In relation to the North Sea in that context, what industry requires, what investors require, what the workforce require, and what our journey to net zero requires is certainty. So notwithstanding the fact that he obviously isn't able to comment in respect of Rosebank and Jackdaw and isn't able to provide the answer, which I think we all know is ultimately coming, can he perhaps share with us some certainty in respect of when he expects the updated environmental guidance to be issued by the government?
Minister.
Well, on his final point, we are moving as quickly as possible. We introduced the consultation, having built on what needed to be done around the Scope 3 emissions, as quickly as possible. We sped up that consultation process and engaged with industry to make sure we still got a substantial number of responses. We have now got those. It closed 2 weeks ago, I think, and we're now considering the responses to that, and we will then issue as quickly as possible what the process is. I can't give him an exact date because we have to analyse the consultation's responses. It would be pointless to seek consultation responses and then not look at them. On the broader question, he's right to raise the question of Grangemouth. It is, of course, extremely disappointing that Petro-Ineos has decided to cease refining at Grangemouth. I would just say, for the benefit of the House, that I arrived in the Energy Department 7 months ago, and the first thing in my entry was the closure of Grangemouth, because of course it didn't arrive in July with the election of a Labour government. It was known about for many, many, many years, and not a single plan was in place by the Conservative government or the SNP government in Edinburgh. Not a single plan was in place. We moved as quickly as possible to invest in the future, to give funding to Project Willow, to make sure there was a viable economic future to that site. I wish that I was in power 5 years ago and could have started that work, but the party opposite and the SNP failed to do anything about it for at least the 10 years we knew Grangemouth was precarious. He'll have to answer for that.
Steve Young. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I commend the Minister for the rapid action that the government has taken that he alluded to earlier. Does he agree with me that it's thanks to our record-breaking investment in not one but two first-of-a-kind carbon capture projects that we are getting on with delivering the good jobs that our communities deserve?
Minister. Well, I do think that carbon capture is important in this. We were delighted to put forward the investment to get the Track 1 projects over the line, and we're looking forward to seeing those develop. That was about giving investor confidence after a protracted period of time under the previous government where those projects fell by the wayside a number of times. We were determined to get those over the line, and I was delighted we did, and we remain supportive of those Track 2 projects, particularly the Acorn cluster in Scotland, which will of course have an impact potentially in areas like Grangemouth in the future, and we want to see investment there as well. These investments are incredibly important about building the jobs that come in the future, and it's partly why this government's determined that we look at what comes next, not just supporting the oil and gas industry, as important it is at the moment.
Cooper.
The Minister's talked long and loud about confidence in the industry. Disappearing investment doesn't engender any confidence at all. The 200,000 people employed in the oil and gas sector in this country will look askance at GB Energy as well. It looks less like a second prize and more like the Bowie prize. But isn't the point here that the oil and gas that we're taking from the North Sea fulfills existing demand? It doesn't create new demand. It keeps the lights on in our homes, in our shops, in our offices and our schools right now.
Well, I think the whole House will have heard that the Honourable Gentleman again repeats the point that £8.3 billion of investment in Great British Energy is not welcome from the party opposite. It will create jobs, including in his constituency, I'm sure, through supply chains. We never said that all the jobs would be in the head office, although there will be an important head office in Aberdeen recognising the skills of that. But it will create tens of thousands of jobs in the investment that it makes, and that is important. But what I would say to him also is that in the past 10 years, a third of the jobs in this industry have already been lost. And so either we accept that there's a transition underway and we put in place the plan and the processes to make sure we're building the industry of the future, or we bury our head in the sand and continue to see thousands more jobs go. I'm determined that we don't do that.
Helen Hayes. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The highly respected Grantham Institute, chaired by Lord Stern, says that a UK government decision to proceed with Rosebank and Jackdaw would signal to all other fossil fuel producers, including the United States and Russia, that it supports a business-as-usual approach to the oil and gas industry. Does the Minister acknowledge the leadership role of the UK government internationally and agree that such leadership is best shown by investing in the sustainable green jobs North Sea communities need, not by granting further unjustifiable permissions? Minister.
Well, I'm not going to be drawn on the specific applications in this case, but I will agree with the broader point that my honourable friend makes, which is the important leadership role for the UK in building the green industries of the future and on climate change. And what my right honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, communicated at COP29 was the importance, actually, of leadership on this most pressing of issues, not, as I say, a future threat, but a present reality. The UK has an important leadership role in that, and critically, that can help deliver the industrial future that we need in clean power of the future.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, the Minister will be aware that the cost of fuel in Northern Ireland is exceptionally large. And the rising cost in every other point of living is leading to businesses finding it difficult to keep heads above water, let alone to turn a profit. The cost of energy sows into every facet of business and home life. So will the Minister outline how he will ensure that the vast resources we have at our fingertips are utilised, and acknowledge that whilst renewable energy is something to work on, we need energy now, and consent must be considered quickly, the correct decision made on behalf of every home and every business in this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for the question, and he's rightly raised these questions with me on a number of occasions in different debates, and they are incredibly important, particularly as I think in a previous Westminster Hall debate he educated me on just how many off-grid households there are in Northern Ireland, and it was a surprisingly high number, so it is an important issue. I would just say that the issue with where our oil and gas comes from, for the question that he asks, of course, it has to also have relevance for the fact that it's traded on an international market, and that the prices that his constituents and others will pay are based on what the fossil fuel market does across the world. And with all the geopolitical uncertainty that we have, it's why we want to get as fast as possible away from fossil fuels and onto renewables, and his constituents will benefit from that as well.
Richard Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister agree the skills of the workforce honed in the oil and gas sector in the North Sea will have an increasingly vital role in the renewables sector? And given the crucial role GB Energy, headquartered in Aberdeen, will have in managing this fair and phased transition, is it not extraordinary that both the Conservatives and the SNP have failed to support this proposal in this Parliament?
Minister.
Well, I do, of course, agree with my honourable friend that a huge shock. But I do agree with them because, of course, failing to back $8.3 billion of investment in your own constituency seems like an odd approach to take, despite whatever election you're standing in. But I would make a broader point about some of the other work that we're taking forward at the moment. And one of the most important things recently was being able to get the skills passport over the line, which is about recognising that the huge skill sets that oil and gas workers working offshore have, 90% of those jobs, those skills, are directly transferable into renewables and into other technologies. The passporting is around making sure that people, those skills and experiences are recognised so that those skilled workers can find jobs in the renewable industry. That's an important piece of work about building the transition to the jobs of the future. We also announced that Aberdeen will be one of the first skills pilots areas, recognising the importance of that skilled transition for the whole of the north east of Scotland.
And the final question on the urgent question, Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As it is the final question, can I commend the Minister for a measured and pragmatic approach in standing at the dispatch box there. It's in sharp contrast with the Conservative Party, who seem to be continuing their journey from zombie government to shambolic irrelevance. And when I talk with investors and businesses in the energy sector, they commend the importance of a plan, whether it's NESO, Mission Control, led by Chris Stark. Can the Minister outline the importance of Great British Energy in that planned transition to the jobs of the future?
Minister.
Well, I think I would just say generally on the tone of this debate that of course we are going to disagree on many things, and by the sounds of it increasingly we disagree on the importance of tackling climate change and of net zero. But I think we all want to see a transition in the North Sea that is fair and prosperous, particularly for the workers that work in it, to make sure that they have confidence that they have well-paid jobs to go into in the future. That's something that I spend every day in this job taking incredibly seriously. And whatever disagreements we might have across the dispatch box, I hope that that is understood. And we want to build a transition that recognises it is already underway and that thousands of jobs have been lost, and that it is our duty, our responsibility as a government to make sure that we put in place the industry and the jobs that come next. And that's what I'll spend every day that I'm privileged to have this job doing.
That concludes the urgent question. We now move on swiftly to the statement. Minister Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and my apologies to the House that you have even more of me to put up with. Madam Deputy Speaker, with permission, I would like to make a statement about support for biomass electricity generation. In January 2024, the previous government launched a consultation on supporting large-scale biomass generators when existing support ends in 2027. That consultation outlined their proposals to continue to support biomass as a valuable form of dispatchable power. Since this government came to office, we have carefully considered responses to that consultation and assessed the case for a new support mechanism. Biomass currently plays an important role in our energy system, but we are conscious of concerns about sustainability and the level of subsidy that biomass plants have received in the past. With this in mind, I want to report to the House on our conclusions about the role of Drax Power Station in Yorkshire in the years 2027 to 2031. In coming to the view I expressed today, we have taken advice from the National Energy System Operator on questions of security of supply, analysed the effect on consumers of support for biomass versus the alternatives, looked at issues around subsidy and sustainability in the existing arrangements, and considered longer-term issues around decarbonisation. Firstly, on security of supply. We inherited a situation from the previous government where there was no long-term planning for our energy system and its resilience. In the system we have inherited, large-scale biomass provides around 5% of our annual electricity generation, serving a specific role as a source of firm power. To meet our needs between 2027 and 31, we could seek to replace Drax with new gas-fired power stations, but in the timescale we now have, there would be significant risks to relying on this approach. And in that context, NESO have advised us that Drax plays an important role in delivering security of supply between 2027 and 2031. Second, on price, we have undertaken comprehensive analysis of the costs of biomass against alternatives and our central projections show that on the right terms and in a much more limited role than today, biomass generation at Drax is the lowest cost option, including when compared to gas-fired power stations for bill payers during this period. Third, we have looked at previous arrangements for subsidy and sustainability. This government's view is that they simply did not deliver a good enough deal for bill payers, and they enabled Drax to make unacceptably large profits. At the same time, they demanded levels of sustainability that are not now in line with the latest scientific evidence or global best practice, including supply chain emissions well above the European standard. And we have concluded that if Drax is to continue to play a role in our power system, these arrangements must urgently be improved going forward. Fourth, we've looked at issues around decarbonisation. Our finding is that there is a potential role for bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or power BECCS, but realistically this will take time to implement and therefore cannot form the primary basis of this decision. On the basis of this assessment, and given the circumstances we have inherited, the clear evidence is that Drax is important to delivering a secure, value-for-money power system in the period 2027 to 31. But we have also concluded that we cannot allow Drax to operate in the way it has done before or with the level of subsidy that it received in the past. And on this basis, we have secured heads of terms that will form the basis of a very different arrangement with Drax for support during the period 2027 to 31. Let me set out, Madam Deputy Speaker, the terms of this agreement. First, it will ensure that Drax plays a much more limited role in the system, providing low-carbon dispatchable power only when it is really needed. Drax currently operates as a baseload plant, running around two-thirds of the time. That means it provides power even when other renewable sources are abundant. This must not continue. So under the new arrangement, Drax will be only supported to operate at a maximum load factor of just 27%. In other words, it will operate less than half as often as it currently does. This will be guaranteed by the design of the dispatchable contract for difference, which we have agreed. When renewable power is abundant, Drax will not generate, and consumers will benefit from cheaper wind and solar instead. Second, reflecting this, the contract will deliver much better value for consumers. It will significantly reduce the amount paid in subsidies compared to the previous support mechanism. This new deal halves the subsidies for Drax, the equivalent to a saving of nearly £6 per household per year. Furthermore, our analysis shows this will save consumers £170 million in subsidy each year of the agreement, compared with the alternative of procuring gas in the capacity market. I can also inform the House that the deal limits the expected rate of return for Drax to a level below that of monopolies regulated by Ofgem. But while this is our central estimate, unlike the last government, we are not prepared to take the risk of prices soaring in response to volatile fossil fuel markets. So this agreement includes a built-in windfall mechanism with rates of 30% and 60% that would claw back excess profits made by Drax, guaranteeing a much fairer deal for consumers than in the past. Thirdly, we will introduce tough new measures on sustainability. We will increase the proportion of woody biomass that must come from sustainable sources from 70% to 100%. We will significantly cut the allowable supply chain emissions to a level in line with much stricter regulations currently operating in the rest of Europe. And we will exclude material sourced from primary forests and old-growth forests from receiving support payments. There will be substantial penalties on Drax if these criteria are not met. And we will go further to ensure greater confidence that these standards will be met. So I can inform the House that we will also appoint an independent sustainability advisor to work with my department, the Low Carbon Contracts Company and Ofgem to ensure our monitoring and enforcement measures are robust and keep pace with science. I want to be clear to the House. Taken together, these measures represent a profound shift from the past on both sustainability and value for money. In this context, this is the right deal for security of supply and price in the period 27 to 31, given the circumstances we inherited from the previous government. But nevertheless, we recognise the strength of concerns in this House and across the country about the use of unabated biomass. It is not a long-term solution. We are determined that the next time these decisions are made, government is not left in the circumstances we have been. So we will do the work that was not done by the previous administration on strong and credible low-carbon alternatives, so that in 4 years' time we have proper options. To help that process, we are setting up an independent review to consider how options for greenhouse gas removal, including large-scale power BECCS and DACs, can assist the UK in meeting our net zero targets and ensure security of supply out to 2050. It will take representations widely on these issues and report back in due course. Madam Deputy Speaker, the steps I have set out today are about fulfilling our duty to ensure security of supply and the best deal for bill payers. We have come into office faced up to the circumstances left by the previous government and delivered a step change in value for money and sustainability. This government will do whatever it takes to deliver energy security, to protect bill payers now and into the future, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also must apologise. I'm sure the House is getting a little bit fed up with myself and the Minister this afternoon. And I thank the Minister for advance sight of this statement. Although I must say that in the past few weeks it has been difficult not to feel at least a little bit sorry for ministers in the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. First, their Secretary of State was forced out of hiding to defend a third runway at Heathrow, something the Secretary of State said once that we couldn't do because it would make us look completely ridiculous. They've had Cornwall Insight state they're going to miss their clean power target by, and I quote, a country mile. And they're getting ready, as I think was clear during the last urgent question, to be overruled by the Prime Minister and approve the oil and gas fields at Rosebank and Jackdaw, something that we would be very welcoming of on this side of the House. And now, the Secretary of State has sent the Honourable Gentleman to the House this afternoon to defend the farce of chopping down trees in forests in Canada, converting them into pellets, shipping them across the Atlantic on diesel-chugging ships and burning them in a power station in North Yorkshire, all in the name of net zero. Now, the Conservative Party is under new management, and that means confronting hard truths. So let's get one thing straight from the outset. Drax's biomass plant is not clean, nor is it cheap. Let's be clear. As the Right Honourable Lady for Surrey East has said, burning wood from the other side of the Atlantic, releasing more CO2 in the process, and labelling it as renewable is a product of carbon budget system which forces politicians to make perverse decisions. Decisions, Madam Deputy Speaker, which result in an extortionate level of subsidy, deliver a bad deal for British taxpayers and bill payers, and make the climate worse. We've started a reset on net zero, and we will not shy away from arguing for a more pragmatic approach, which prioritises cheap, stable and reliable energy. Turning to the details of the statement today, we naturally welcome a more limited role for Drax biomass in our power system, but we should be clear that more biomass subsidies are only needed in the short term, because this government is embarking on a reckless experiment to have a grid based entirely on intermittent renewables at the expense of flexible and reliable baseload power. Drax's role could be filled with more gas power plants, which are cheaper and cleaner than burning trees shipped in from Canada. Ministers know that burning wood at Drax produces 4 times the emissions of our last coal power plant, which in turn produces around twice the carbon emissions of gas. That's gas that we could get from the non-subsidised fields in the North Sea if this government weren't in such an ideological rush to shut down our domestic energy industry. So on the question of cost, the new agreement that the Minister has signed us up to comes with a strike price that is genuinely eye-watering, at £160 per megawatt hour in today's money. That's actually higher than Drax's existing agreement of £138 per megawatt hour. And in fact, the Baringa analysis that Drax has put out this morning shows that bill payers will still be paying over £450 million a year in subsidies to burn trees. Now, if the analysis behind the Minister's promise to cut bills by £300 is anything to go by, we should know not to rely on them by too much. So can I ask, has his department carried out any of its own independent analysis separate to that which was published by Drax this morning, to determine at what the increased strike price will cost the British people and how that compares to supporting extra gas power in the capacity market. We welcome the strength of sustainability criteria, as investigations by Ofgem and the BBC Panorama have shown that there are serious questions to be answered by Drax around the import of wood from untouched primary forests in British Columbia. But as the BBC journalist Joe Crowley, who reported on these issues for Panorama, stated this morning, more clarity is needed on whether wood from primary forests will be classed as unsustainable under this new regime. So can the Minister confirm that Drax will not be allowed to burn wood from primary forests during any of its generation, not just that which is subsidised? And what work is being done to make sure that the new sustainability criteria is actually enforceable? And on the subject of sustainability reporting, can the Minister also confirm the Department has received the KPMG report that the Prime Minister said he would look at and confirm whether they will be placing a copy in the library of the House? I note that the Minister's statement has left the door wide open for the introduction of power BECCS after these transition arrangements end in 2031. That proposal, to fit first-of-a-kind technology solely for the purpose of meeting our carbon budgets, would cost the bill payer up to £40 billion, or £1.7 billion a year. That, we believe, is unacceptable. So can the Minister confirm to the House whether his department has produced any analysis of what a system without BECCS would cost, and will they rule out keeping this racket going indefinitely and seeing people's energy bills rise as a result to pay for BECCS? And will the government set a date for the last tree to be burnt in a British biomass power station? Madam Deputy Speaker, this government has been promising us clean, cheap, homegrown energy, but burning trees at Drax is not clean, it's not cheap, and the trees are certainly not homegrown. And if the widespread burning of forests is part of the solution to climate change, then we have to ask ourselves if that's the problem we are trying to solve.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I mean, under new management, indeed, I think the tough thing about being the acting Shadow Secretary of State is, of course, it's not his script that he's reading out. And we are, on this side, fixing the mistakes that the previous government left. And I would just gently point out that 8 previous Conservative energy ministers stood on this side of the dispatch box and deal after deal after deal announced a worse deal than this for bill payers, for energy security, for sustainability, and he seems to forget that today. In fact, I mean, only a year ago, such is my love of the honourable gentleman's contributions in this House, I was reading up on Hanson. Only a year ago, he was saying that he had absolute confidence in the deal that the previous government made with Drax. And so, on his questions, let me just outline why this deal is so different from his party's deals in the past. First, he asked about the question of subsidy. He mentions the figure of what this will cost to deliver the dispatchable power he needs. He missed the fact that, of course, this is half what was paid under the previous government, nearly £1 billion a year paid by the previous government to Drax. We've halved that to lower subsidies to lower bills for consumers. Secondly, he spoke about the sustainability questions, and we agree on the importance of tightening up the sustainability. That's why we've moved from the 70% to the 100%. Of course, I would gently say again, he was quite happy to support, when he was in the Energy Department, public money going into that unsustainable biomass year after year after year. We are saying if there is unsustainable biomass in the mix, we will not pay a penny of subsidy to Drax. And thirdly, of course, what the previous government didn't do was any sort of deal to control the runaway profits that Drax, the excess profits, the record profits that Drax were able to obtain as part of the deal that they had with them. We have put in place a mechanism to claw back that excess profit so that the people of this country don't pay over the odds for their energy. And fourthly, and let me just make this point about energy security, which I think is so important. The party opposite exposed us year after year after year to a lack of a plan for what the energy system would look like in the late 2020s and into the 2030s. We've had to take tough decisions quickly to secure that supply for the future, and that's what we've decided to do. And even running Drax when it wasn't necessary, when there were clean, cheaper alternatives in the system, we have decided that that will not happen. And that's why, to his specific point around Drax running less, limited generation times mean that it will only run when we need it for capacity for demand in the system. And the alternative, which he asked for the figure, which I said in the statement, would be £170 million more every single year. On the final point around the future of BECCS, we are open-minded at this point about what role BECCS will play, but I do agree with them that it is important we come to a decision point on it soon. The review that we've outlined is about taking all the various bits of science that we know are already there in different reports, but trying to work out a credible pathway for whether power BECCS will really play a role in the system or not, and we'll make that decision as soon as possible. But I would just finish, Madam Deputy Speaker, by saying that this is an extremely different deal, one that it delivers a benefit for the hard-working people of this country, that ensures sustainability is at the heart of it, and that protects our energy security in the years ahead.
Chair of the Select Committee, Bill Esterson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate my honourable friend on his marathon stint, on the pragmatic and well-crafted analysis he set out of how the government's energy policies are addressing the security of supply and providing the best deal for bill payers. And can I just say this is in stark contrast to the party opposite and in what he described in particular as the terrible deal that they presided over on Drax while they were in office. The statement today is a timely reminder of the challenges around Drax, not least given the news over the weekend, just over the weekend, of further misreporting of the burning of primary forest. The National Energy Systems Operator, in its future energy pathway, predicted a reduction in the use of biomass as part of the UK becoming more energy independent. So, can I ask the Minister if, in his announcement, he foresees the cuts in subsidies and the reliance on Drax will contribute towards the government's clean power plan, towards energy security and towards reducing bills for all of our constituents?
Minister.
Well, the Chair of the Select Committee, of course, is absolutely right around where Drax and where biomass generally fits within the wider energy system that we have. And of course, what we want to build at pace is the clean power system that takes us off the volatile fossil fuel markets. That is important, but of course there are short-term issues around ensuring that we have the dispatchable power that we need when we need it. There are long-term decisions that this government's taken. For example, the first funding scheme for long-duration energy storage in 40 years that we hope will see modern new technologies of long-duration energy storage, but also some classics from the history books of pumped hydro storage playing a really critical role on the system, delivering the dispatchable clean power we need. But there is a short-term question that we had to answer that the previous government didn't have an answer for, that how we get to 2031. We either build new gas units. Our analysis was that this was, and the advice from NISO was that this was more likely to deliver the energy security, but also in the end be cheaper to bill payers who ultimately have to pay the bill for this. So this, of course, our long-term ambition is to build towards that clean power system. This is an important step to get us the energy security that we need in the system.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Pippa Heylings.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to begin by thanking the Minister for sharing his statement with us in advance. Climate change and nature loss are undoubtedly the greatest twin threats we face. Whilst pursuing the clean power by 2030 goal, the government does need to reconsider its decision to indeterminately extend the burning of biomass as part of the energy mix, despite overwhelming evidence that it's not sustainable nor truly renewable, especially with the threats to virgin forests. The Minister does say that biomass is vital for energy security, supplying 5% of the UK's electricity. However, he does not, or fails to, mention that biomass also emits 18% more carbon dioxide than coal and takes nearly a century for new trees to absorb these emissions. So this isn't energy security, it's a carbon-ticking time bomb. We're told by the Minister that NISO advised the necessity of Drax between 2027 and 2031 to prevent supply risks. That is due to the reckless rowing back by the former government and the absence of accelerated investments in renewables and for the continued investment in Drax as part of their strategy. But what kind of future are we building if it depends on burning forests rather than investing in real renewable energy sources? On cost, the Minister tells us that biomass at Drax is cheaper than gas-fired power. But we must not forget that past subsidies by the former government allowed Drax to profit excessively at the expenses of bill payers. Even now, today, despite halved subsidies, Drax's shares have surged, suggesting that even this deal remains a good deal for them and potentially a bad one for taxpayers. We therefore call on the government to release the 2022 KPMG report into Drax's subsidy claims, should have been released during the Conservative government's time. Transparency is crucial, and the public deserves to know if their money has been misused. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just end by asking whether we are looking for homegrown clean energy.
Minister.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions, and her tone means that I'll resist the urge to say that although I made fun of the Shadow Minister for 8 times, it was of course the current Lib Dem leader who agreed the first support deal for Drax. But we'll move past that onto what I think were important questions about security of supply. And of course the place we want to get to by the end of this period is where we're not forced into making a decision like this again, and I think that's really important to say. We have got a strong deal that protects bill payers, that improves sustainability and that delivers energy security, but we want to have options. And the truth is, as she rightly points out, we came into government without those options because of the decisions made by the party opposite. So that's a really important point. On the excess profits point, I think it is important to say there was no mechanism in place before to claw back those excess profits. We've made that a key part of this negotiation, and we've managed to get it into this deal, because it is important that even if our estimates are wrong, and the estimates of course mean that they will have a profit below that the level expected of the regulated companies by Ofgem, but even if that's wrong, we claw back that additional profit from Drax. That's important for the system. On the question which the Shadow Minister also raised about KPMG's reports, I know that my department has seen them and has engaged with them. I know that Ofgem are still engaged in that audit process. I will take the questions away and see what can be done about sharing those reports.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've got the new line from the official opposition. They are, we're told, a firm under new management, but it sounds to me rather like the same circus, just with different clowns. It isn't the reality of what we have heard that the Minister is absolutely right to say that the new deal that this government is putting in place is a far better deal for taxpayers. It's important that Drax was stood up to. The previous deal was an absolute disgrace for taxpayers. But can my honourable friend tell us a little more about the projections that he's seen, that the deal that he has agreed and announces today is the best role for taxpayers, even in comparison to gas, because we heard a different suggestion from the Shadow Minister opposite. Can he tell us a little more about how he can be certain that this is the best deal possible for taxpayers in this?
Well, my honourable friend makes a really important point, and I think on 2 points it is important to look at the analysis of the importance of Drax on the system. So first of all, the counterfactual of whether we built new gas-fired power stations. Our analysis is that the deal that we've agreed, which is the use of gas on the system at 27% of the time, is £170 million less than that. But the second part of that analysis that is really important around energy security is that the assessment is that even if we wanted to go down that route, there would be risks about whether we could actually build that capacity in the time that we have. And this is all about the decisions taken by the previous government not looking far enough ahead and not having that capacity on the system, so that even if we did want to proceed with new gas, actually there would be questions about whether we could build it in time. So this deal is around absolutely protecting bill payers, having the subsidy from £1 billion, making sure there is dispatchable power when we need it as we build the clean power system. And as we go towards the 2030s, our long-term planning is what comes next in terms of our clean power mix, but also in terms of the long duration and short duration storage mixes that will help us make different decisions from the one we were forced to make this time.
Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I suppose we should be told that half a loaf is better than none, but this does seem to me to be a half-baked loaf, to say the least. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister has spent an hour this afternoon lecturing this House about why it was better to import oil and gas from overseas rather than to extend the production of at least some homegrown material. But the bottom line on this is, quite clearly, the Minister hasn't read the KPMG report, the Prime Minister hasn't read the KPMG report, and we are still going to pay billions of pounds in subsidy to import pellets created in Canada and then shipped at God knows what carbon cost across the Atlantic. Where, please, is the sense in that?
Well, first of all, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've spent the last hour answering questions from honourable members across the House. I haven't lectured anyone. I have, however, stated the facts, which is that if oil and gas is extracted from the North Sea, it is sold on the open market for whatever price the international markets have at that given moment. That's the point I was making. It delivers neither energy security nor confidence to bill payers. And while members in the party opposite may want us to go back to the fossil fuel casino and hope that we can play a better hand this time round, I think the reality is we should be building a secure power system that delivers energy security but also confidence that we won't be exposed to quite the same price spikes we have been in the past. So if he takes that as a lecture, he can take it as such. But what I would say on the point about the role that Drax will play, of course we looked at all of the assessments around Drax to date. The reason we've put in such a robust process around sustainability and around independent assessments of some of that is frankly because of the questions that he raises, because we know that there have been questions in the past. We want to make sure there are tough penalties if Drax don't comply, but also raising the sustainability from the level that the previous government had at 70% to 100% means we will not pay a penny of subsidy if Drax fails on the sustainability tests that we have set out for them. And that protects consumers right across this country and delivers the dispatchable power that we need.
Alex Serval.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for his statement. I've met women from the southern United States who live next door to forests which have been cut down, primary forests, which have been cut down by Drax for wood pellets to be burnt in Yorkshire, and from British Columbia. And as we know from BBC Panorama and Ofgem, primary and old cut forests have been utilised by Drax. Drax cannot be trusted to ensure that the sustainability requirements the Minister's put forward will be met. What powers and audit trail will the new independent sustainability advisor utilise to ensure that Drax is burning 100% sustainable wood and not primary forests, ruining people's lives in North America?
Well, my honourable friend makes an incredibly important point, and he's right, of course, that the sustainability criteria are important, but actually making sure they are met is important as well. So we will work with, this is a contract for difference agreement, we'll be working with Ofgem to work out exactly what their role is in this as the regulator, but also what we've announced to go above what has been in place before is an independent advisor that will work with my department, with the low carbon contracts company, with Ofgem to make sure the latest science, the latest awareness on biomass and on different elements of it are key in our decision making, and to make sure there is that real audit trail in place. But ultimately, I think the other thing that is really important about this is that there is now no room whatsoever for Drax to comply with the sustainability criteria. It must be 100%, or there will not be a penny of subsidy for any that is not sustainable. That is important, and the audit trail will be part of that work as well.
Bradley Thomas.
Deputy Speaker, will the Minister agree to publish the full comprehensive analysis of the cost of providing support to Drax versus the alternatives?
Minister.
Well, I'm very happy. I think transparency on this is important, so I'm very happy to publish what we can. There will be elements of that analysis that is obviously commercially sensitive in terms of details about how Drax runs its power station, so I will have to take away exactly what can be published. I know that the NISO today, for example, has published a summary of their advice to give clarity on what their view was around the security of supply questions. I'm happy to take the point away and I'll write to him.
Barry Gardner.
Drax has exploited UK taxpayers for far too long. It has lied about meeting sustainability rules, has burnt 1 million tonnes of wood from primary forest, gagged whistleblowers with non-disclosure agreements, and pretended it could sequester carbon from replanted forests in time to meet our 2050 targets. Today, the government has brought that to a stop. It has debunked Drax's lies, cut its subsidy, and set a clear and sensible exit strategy that will maintain security of supply. After 15 years of campaigning, I welcome this as a breakthrough for honesty and common sense. And will the Minister now look at the role of Ofgem in all of this? Just this weekend, when it was informed of the other break in proper reporting of sustainability, it replied that that is the same issue as we've dealt with before. What would he say if a policeman said that about a serial murderer?
Minister.
With the start of my honourable friend's question, can I first of all just say that I agree that this government was deeply concerned about sustainability practices at Drax and about the level of subsidy, frankly, that was part of the deal negotiated by the previous government. We inherited a dire situation in terms of the long-term planning for our energy security. And so what we have sought to do with this deal is answer all of those questions on sustainability, on security of supply, on excess profits, and on the role of Drax on the system for dispatchable power, which is important. In terms of the questions about the role of Ofgem and all this, I know that the audit into some of Drax's practices is still underway. I'm not privy to the details of that rightly because it's Ofgem's review, but we have a wider review of the role and remit of Ofgem underway at the moment, and I think that would be an opportunity for the honourable gentleman to feed in his thoughts on the future of Ofgem.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Biomass burning has always been a sticking plaster that's allowed successive governments to claim green progress while continuing to emit immense amounts of CO2. The public were promised £28 billion a year of green investment, but instead we're getting less than 6% of what's needed. So when will the UK government commit to significant direct investment in long-term energy storage, such as hydropump storage and green hydrogen production, so the UK can move past burning forests for our energy?
Minister.
Well, I agree with the honourable gentleman on his point, and I reiterate the point that we wish we were not in the position we were in when we came to government, where, for a security of supply point of view, this was the only option that would deliver the security out to the early 2030s. What we've sought to do is get the best possible deal for sustainability and for bill payers, but I agree with them, we need to be building what comes next. Last year we announced that for the first time in 40 years the government would be funding long duration energy storage. I've held a number of meetings with developers on pumped hydro, but also on new modern forms of long duration energy storage. There's some really interesting innovative ideas out there. Ofgem is currently putting in place the technical specifications of what that cap and floor scheme will look like, but we want to get that rolling as soon as possible, and from all my meetings with developers in Scotland there is huge potential around pumped hydro in particular that they are waiting for certainty from government to move forward with, and we're determined to give them that.
Olivia Blair.
Deputy Speaker, reports show that Drax has behaved appallingly and seemingly under the last government had pretty free rein. I welcome the fact that this settlement has a drastic reduction in subsidies, an upping of sustainability to 100% in supply chains, and a windfall tax principle that will deliver value for the British bill payer. And I welcome the further consultations the Minister has outlined, but it raises the question, why was the last government unable to get anywhere near to this deal?
Minister.
Well, I'm tempted to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, we'll have to ask the party opposite that question, but Of course, they're under new management, so they don't know why the previous government, that they were all ministers and made the decisions they did. The truth is that for far too long, under I think 8 different Conservative energy ministers, they signed off deal after deal after deal to Drax with uncapped profits, with nowhere near the sustainability criteria that they should have had, letting Drax do really whatever they wanted with this power station, and we have put that to a stop. And let's be really clear, on the subsidy, we have halved that subsidy, putting £6 off every single bill in this country every single year. We have increased sustainability to 100%, and we're delivering the energy security this country needs. But we should not have been in the position we were in on coming to office, where there were nowhere near enough long-term plans for what the future of our energy system looks like.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think I detected one item of agreement between the Minister and his shadow, and that was that there needs to be a long-term solution, and this is not a short-term fix. Surprisingly, there seems little support from the government benches for Drax, which plays a major part in the regional economy. In my own Brigg and Immingham constituency, Associated British Ports invested £150 million on the facility to import the biomass, and a significant number of my constituents will be involved in the supply chain. Can the Minister give an assurance that he will bear in mind the impact on the local economy as we move forward to a longer-term solution?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman makes a very important point. I would just gently point out the Shadow Minister and I agree on a lot more than he likes to pretend, but or I like to pretend, perhaps. But he makes a very important point, and of course he's right that we are really aware of the importance of the jobs that will be at this particular power station and in the supply chain as well. We'll be working with Drax on what that looks like. We are, of course, changing the role that Drax will use the power station in Selby for, and I will make sure that I'm having those conversations about the supply chain, and I'm happy to speak to him more about that in due course.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his statement. And I think he should be commended for ending the terrible deal negotiated by the party opposite, which led to higher bills, excess profits and poor sustainability standards. But I think it is worth saying again that there does seem to be no end to the party opposite's rank hypocrisy on energy policy. In government, the then Secretary of State for Energy, the member for East Surrey, signed off the planning consent, I've got it here, for the Drax carbon capture project, saying, and I quote, "the public benefits outweigh the harm." Now the Shadow Minister comes to the dispatch box to decry the costs, while the Right Honourable Member for East Surrey also opposes Drax. Can I ask the Minister whether he has considered capturing the burning hypocrisy of the benches opposite, because it seems to be a truly inexhaustible resource?
Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend makes the point for me. He forgets, of course, they're under new management, so it's all fine. We just forget everything that the last 14 years included and move on. Well, of course, we've had to pick up the pieces from the last 14 years, and while they won't take responsibility for those decisions, we have grasped these challenges and are moving forward with them as quickly as possible. And the truth is, we inherited not just an energy system that didn't have the long-term planning in it that it should have, but on Drax in particular did not have a deal that was good for the climate, good for energy security, or good for the hard-working people of this country that paid year after year after year for the subsidies that the previous government negotiated. We've brought down that, halving the subsidy every year, putting money back into people's pockets, and of course making sure that if there are excess profits, those profits come back to the Exchequer.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This net zero madness coming from this place is truly staggering. Right. Bear in mind, this power station used to burn coal from a coal mine from less than 20 miles away. Yeah. We're now transporting wood from 3,000 miles away. We're paying over £10 billion in subsidies for this power station, and it's producing 4 times more CO2 than a coal-fired power station. So could the Minister explain to me how this is contributing towards net zero?
Minister.
Well, I wasn't aware that it was the policy of the Reform Party to reopen the coal mines, but that's good to know. Great to know. Well, I'm very proud that as a country we have moved past coal-fired power station, coal power generation, which is incredibly destructive for our environment. We closed the last coal power power station last year at Ratcliffe-on-Soar, and the workforce there played a really proud role in recognising the role that they played in powering the country for many, many years, but also recognising that the drive to net zero is important. While we're building the clean power system that delivers energy security for the future, they're taking us back to the Stone Age.
Joanna Baxter.
Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and the strict new sustainability rules imposed on Drax, which will mean that we won't pay a penny for unsustainably sourced biomass. Can he give the House a bit more detail on the role of the independent adviser, though, because the work that they will be doing to hold Drax to account will be critical to ensuring that this deal progresses?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for the question. The point of having an independent adviser is that while the role of the Low Carbon Contracts Company, which will be the counterparty, of course, to the Contract for Difference that we've agreed, and the role of Ofgem as a regulator is incredibly important, we think there is also a role for someone independent to make sure that they are analysing the situation with the particular questions about biomass and sustainability, but also having an eye on the science as it moves forward, because part of the challenge is that over years the sustainability information that we have, the types of forestry and where it comes from has changed. This adviser will play a really important role in that and will advise my department, Ofgem, and the Low Carbon Contracts Company in the years ahead of this deal. But I think it is important to say to my honourable friend that we want to make sure we've also got an independent review of what the future of this looks like, so that in 5 years' time we're not looking at the same decision as we are now.
Sir Julian Lewis.
I welcome the emphasis that the Minister keeps putting on energy security. So can he give us some idea of the timetable for when we will see the first of these small modular nuclear reactors commissioned, preferably ones built by Rolls-Royce, who have expertise in the area thanks to their excellent work for the Royal Navy?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his question. He's not going to draw me into a competition on the small modular reactors that is still going at the moment, but he has made his case for his preferred company at the moment. What I will say is that last week the Prime Minister announced that we have a new commitment to reviewing the 2011 planning statement so that we can have much more new nuclear across the UK. Particularly important because previously there were only 8 designated sites that were possible. The small modular reactors, of course, open up possibilities right across the country, and we want to see much more of that. We're moving as fast as possible to make sure these are underway, and I also hope that we can move in such a speed that the Scottish Government will change its objection to having small modular reactors in Scotland.
Joe Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The news of a windfall tax on Drax will be welcomed by people across my constituency. Can the Minister assure me that this will be the end of the grotesque profits going to Drax at the expense of the taxpayer?
Minister.
Well, I can give my honourable friend that assurance. Partly we have, of course, significantly reduced the ability of Drax to make profits from this, but we've also been sure that if there are excess profits, that those are clawed back on behalf of the British people. And so there are additional rates in the mechanism that we have designed of 30% and 60% to make sure that any unexpected profits are clawed back as well. And of course, this wasn't the case under the deal of the 8 previous energy ministers in the previous government who signed off deals on Drax year after year after year. This is a new way of operating that protects our energy security, but also protects the hard-working people of this country.
Carla Denyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Drax is a clean energy scam that has been handed £6 billion by successive Conservative ministers since 2012, when that money should have been spent on getting energy bills down. Now, the Minister rightly cites past excess profits. Specifically, I believe he said that the new contract will allow government to claw them back. Can he clarify for me, will the contract allow clawback of previous excess profits and remedy the past misspending of public money, or does he just mean going forward into the future, in which case that is still throwing good money after bad, just slightly less of it?
Minister.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her question? We don't have a mechanism to claw back past profits from any company. That's not something that governments are able to do. What we can do is move forward with a fair system that, first of all, reduces the subsidy considerably, but also has these excess profit mechanisms in place, a windfall tax in place, to make sure that if they do generate additional profits, that we can claw that back for the British public. That's important. But I would just say that the level of subsidy that we have agreed in this deal brings it down to a considerably lower level, half what it was under the previous government.
Tom Collins.
Deputy Speaker, I welcome this revision of Drax's role in our energy system, reducing biomass and ensuring that where it is used, it displaces gas, not excess wind and solar. But we also need to find new low-carbon forms of dispatchable power backed up by long-term energy storage at scale. Hydrogen is a strong candidate for this, and by moving fast, the UK can reduce costs and regain our early mover advantage. So will the Minister work with industry at pace to ensure that the opportunities around hydrogen are known, explored and exploited?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for the question. He's right that one of the really important outcomes from this new deal is that instead of cheaper wind and solar power being displaced by Drax when it operated with baseload capacity, Drax will only operate when we need it on the system, which means that those cheaper, cleaner power sources that we're building in abundance and that we want to see much more of in the years ahead can generate and can deliver cheaper power for the people of this country. On the wider point, I do think it's important that we explore the role that hydrogen can play on the system. There are a number of different technologies being looked at the moment. I met with some investors looking at the future of the gas system just last week to take forward some of these questions, and I'm happy to discuss this further with them in the future.
Dr Andrew Morrison.
The Minister said that he's looking for strong and credible low-carbon alternatives to burning biomass in order to generate electricity. Would he ensure that those alternatives do not include so-called energy from waste plants, since burning waste is as dirty as coal? And will he follow Scotland and Wales in placing a moratorium on the construction of new waste incinerators?
Minister.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for the question? I think he's right to say what we want to build at the end of this are credible low-carbon alternatives. I'll look at the specific cases, but they're not what we see as being key to the review that we want to undertake. We want to look at carbon capture and other technologies, for example, but also, I think, really crucially, looking at how we store some of the renewable energy that we're generating in abundance, that particularly we can't use at times of peak demand, such as long-duration energy storage, and increasingly short-duration energy storage batteries that are powering much, much more than have been in the past. But I'll look at the specific points that he raises.
Alistair Strathern.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the last government's deal with Drax was not just shocking value for the taxpayers, leaving us all on the hook for subsidising sky-high profits during the cost of living crisis, but bad news for the environment too, with real concerns about the sustainability of their supply chain. As this government rightly takes a measured approach to ensuring we protect not just bill payers but workers too, as we seize the benefits of the green transition, what assurances can the Minister give my constituents that this will be a far better deal for our country?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for the question. He's right that this is about a good deal now in the short term for making sure that we have security of supply out to the early 2030s. It was key from the NESO's advice that we made this decision on the basis of security of supply, but we have also sought to, in the process, half the subsidy that Drax was given by the previous government and deliver on the sustainability criteria, taking it from 70% to 100%. So this is a good deal for the people of this country. But I think he also touches on the importance of the work that we need to do in the broader energy space to deliver energy security. That's why Clean Power by 2030, our sprint to deliver decarbonised power, is so important, delivering good jobs in the supply chains right across this country.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This statement today should be a warning to all of those across the House who are the cheerleaders for renewable energy. Because let's not forget, in 2010, Drax Power Station was the poster boy for the green energy policy. And of course, it turned out that instead of being green energy, it produces more CO2, would chop down the natural habitat 3,000 miles away, bring it and burn it in a power station in England, and consumers pay the grand total of £1,000 million a year for the pleasure of doing so. And this government has not learnt from the lesson, because only this year we have had a similar mistake being made, where with wind energy, where the government has given a subsidy 6 times what the price of gas would be. When are we going to find in 15 years' time a minister standing again apologising for a waste of public money, high electricity prices and environmental disaster?
Yeah. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, after an urgent question and a statement, I hope I'm not still standing here in 15 years' time, and I suspect the House will support that. Look, let me just be really clear. I have to say I don't remember it being the poster child for the clean energy transition, but I have outlined very clearly why I think this is a decision that is important in terms of energy security, but we wish as a government that we had come in with more options. Unfortunately, those options weren't there, and therefore we have made the best out of what is a difficult situation to get an incredibly good deal that delivers value for money, improves sustainability and delivers on energy security. But I want to see in the 2030s our clean power system delivering cheaper bills, in industrial manufacturing jobs right across the country, and I hope that in 15 years' time he and I will have a conversation about how that is delivering for both of our constituents.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Shadow Minister talks about being under new management. I slightly suspect he'll be saying the same thing in a few months' time after that inevitable bloody coup. But I wanted to commend this statement because it will do some really important things. Capping Drax's output, a windfall tax on Drax, millions saved by halving subsidies paid for by my constituents, and the forcing up of sustainability. It is a pragmatic solution to a disastrous inheritance. Does the Minister agree with me that this will be a better deal for taxpayers and consumers, for our energy security and our environment?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend summarises the importance of this deal very clearly. We've limited the expected rate of return for Drax to a level below that of monopolies regulated by Ofgem. We've halved the subsidies that are provided to Drax that were in every single deal from the party opposite year after year after year, saving £170 million each year of this agreement. We've introduced a windfall tax of 30% and 60% clawed back should Drax's profits exceed that level. We're delivering on energy security and on tougher sustainability requirements. But at the heart of this deal is better value for money for the hard-working people of this country.
And the final question, Paul Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Drax has been a greenwashing con that ripped off the British public for far too long. And so can I welcome this statement? The Minister and the Energy Secretary have indeed done more than 8 previous Tory energy ministers and indeed 1 Lib Dem Secretary of State. So can I welcome the move to slash the subsidy for Drax and enforce 100% sustainability targets on the supply chains? But can I gently urge him, he talks about a windfall mechanism, to call a spade a spade. This is a windfall tax on Drax and we should be proud of saying so.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question at the risk of me getting into trouble by those who are responsible for tax matters. I will simply say this is a windfall mechanism which does exactly the same thing, and it does exactly what the party opposite failed to do in 14 years, which is to make sure there is a good deal, good value for money for the British public, delivering our energy security and, crucially, getting us to a point where our clean power plan for 2030 delivers energy security, climate leadership, jobs right across this country. It's the ambition of doing something different in this country and doing it fast, and we're committed to delivering it.
That concludes the statement.